and using AI, which is really good in language. It made a really interesting distinction.
Language models,
Language models,
large language
right?
models,
Very good
LLMs.
at understanding common usage of language. Sympathy is when you understand someone else's suffering or need. I understand it. Empathy is you feel their suffering. You have an emotional connection. Compassion is when you want to help them.
Welcome to the King Dems podcast, where we share the stories of extraordinary people and dissect hot, relevant topics that shape our world. From visionary leaders to trailblazing creatives, we uncover the mindset, strategy, and grit behind greatness. Whether it's business, culture, or personal growth, we ask the real questions. This isn't just conversation, it's transformation. The King Dems podcast. Your next breakthrough starts here.
Music licensing reimagined.
We are live. Ladies and gentlemen, you're once again welcome to the King Dems podcast. And today I have with me, fighting out of Wisconsin, United States of America, make welcome Derrick, the leadership and management expert, Van Mell. How are you, Derrick?
Fun to be here.
Whoa, what a building brick, for Derrick. And of course, I know for a moment you were looking, am I a fighter now? Like, how did I get this introduction? Well, I'm a very big enthusiast over the UFC. So, but I probably did not tell you that earlier conversation is, yeah, I did not mention that. We're talking about our shared, finance and economics background, but I'm actually a martial artist as well. So growing up, I was a skinny kid in Lagos, Nigeria, and if you know Lagos, they like to bully the skinny kids. But I said no, I'm not having any of this. I got into taekwondo. Karate, and of course later on mixed martial arts. So I love martial arts. For one thing, it helps you to build two things: confidence and discipline. Yeah, so that is one side of me. You just got to know again. Well, let's stop talking about me and let's start talking about the elephant in the room, the the titan in the room. That is the building brick called Derrick. So you are a man on a mission. Being the manager, of managers, right? Being the leader of leaders. And of course you are also a modern day business philosopher like myself. But how would you describe yourself as a person?
Well, I think I have more years to reflect on than you do. But I think actually as I've worked through a management consulting career and project planner, where I've really come to is to see that my mission is to get people to take up management as a calling, as an opportunity to serve others. And that's not just purely altruistic. I mean, that is the best way to run a business. It's the best way to make any organization, for-profit, not-for-profit, strong, resilient, innovative, is really to have managers and leaders who really just care about helping people be the best that they can be. And you mentioned that, you'd had that kind of boss in some of your earlier life who would talk to you about, the importance of power, how to use it, how not to abuse it. So my mission is to help people to be a great boss, because that's a rare and wonderful, powerful thing. We promise not to talk about politics, but the world needs great managers. We need people who can show how we can take care of each other, and that's good for everybody in the short run and in the long run. So I'm a crusader for managers, and so my practical mission is really to put a foundation under the science of management. And that's a kind of a bold statement, but I'll let you query me about that. That's how I think of myself now.
Wow, interesting stuff. You mentioned, that particular business leader I spoke about. That's, my boss at PwC. And interestingly, he's been on the podcast before. So a very, very big shout out to Tolu Adeleke of PwC Nigeria. He's a partner with PwC Nigeria. And of course, I learned a lot while working, with him at PwC. But one thing that always, stuck for me is, that quote he always put out about what is important is not the example of your power, but the power of your example. It's very important to lead by example, and it's fantastic to have such kind of leaders. And for me, being a business philosopher, I place premium on servant leadership. Once you look through the annals of history and try to map out the greatest leaders that have ever lived, talking about Jesus Christ, Prophet Muhammad, talk about Mahatma Gandhi, talk about Winston Churchill, talk about Abraham Lincoln, the list is endless. One thing that resonates with all of them, one common denominator, is that they have all been servant leaders. There's a difference between being a leader and being a boss. And I would always, choose the option of being a leader, because service to humanity is a privilege.
But
I really don't know why it doesn't resonate with other people, but I'll give you the floor. You want to share your sage knowledge?
yeah, I love those examples. I'm an enormous fan of Winston Churchill. And not a perfect.
Wow, Winston Churchill. I did tell you, I read his book, growing up in my father's library.
Yeah,
Nobel Prize literature winner. Very brilliant
That's
mind.
right. But not a perfect person. I mean, there are certain places of the world where he's not thought of as a good person. But it's an interesting question about how you think about power. And when I was my first job, I worked on a large real estate project in Boston, Massachusetts, East Coast of the United States. And, I was just out of college. I had my head full of my dreams of what I'm going to accomplish and great camaraderie at work. I was basically the file clerk on this large project. And the people who were running it didn't have much management experience. So I'd come into work and didn't get much supervision. People were yelling at each other. Project got into trouble. It's a huge project. And so I experienced what it was like to have a boss, a manager, a leader who had enormous power over my life, right? They could ignore me, which is a really a terrible abuse of power. And I would go days without being able to talk to my boss. And so I had that experience. And a lot of people, of course, have had a boss who has misused their power or abusive. And I don't want to dwell on that. But I would, part of that same story, my own sort of origin story, is that after a couple of years there, I was just miserable. But then I got a new boss, a guy named Ron Jarek, who was an architect. And Ron was a big guy, played football in college, but was as gentle as could be. And he was a genuinely, deeply caring person. He was also skilled. He's also competent at his work. And I was assigned to him as his direct report. And my life changed from pretty bad to really great in a moment when I started to work for Ron. And it made me reflect. Now, I'd like to say when I was, 23, 24 years old, I figured all this out. No, it took me a long, long time to really understand the dynamics and to be able to share that lesson in some practical way. But it was a guy who, like all great bosses, he cared about me. He invited me into his home. He wanted to know what I wanted to do. He gave me challenges. He let me fail a little bit, right? He encouraged me, let me do more than I dreamed I could possibly do. And so I'm so grateful to him because he taught me not only for what he did for me, but also what he did for all the people around him too. Even some of his peers who were maybe not so great as managers, he quieted the whole office down because he had great emotional intelligence. He was a mature, caring, thoughtful, skillful person. So I think about Ron all the time. And as a model, in some ways, if I could wish that I could help people be just like that one guy, that would be a great accomplishment, in my life.
Wow.
But he knew how to use his power in the right way. So that you'd ask who I am. Well, that it was formed by this early experience, both bad and good. So
the good, the bad, and the ugly. You haven't spoken about the ugly. Maybe we'll reserve that for part 2. But what a run of events through Ron. And of course, big shout out to Ron. Great leaders, great managers should be highly appreciated. You talk about how people dread the word manager, but do you believe the world needs more managers, not fewer? And what's the distinction between a manager and a leader?
Oh, that's one of my favorite questions. Thank you. But so
all is welcome.
Yeah, there's so much confusion between who was a manager, who was a leader, and it causes so many problems at work in the workplace. It's a very serious issue, just that we don't have clear definitions. So part of what I've done starting 2017 was try to create a standard. I've created a standard knowledge-based structure for management called the Index of Management Terms and Practices. And of course, the critical terms are manager and leader. So a manager is someone who helps people work together. Right? And we all know how hard that is to do, people being people. A leader is someone who inspires people to take a risk. And that could be fulfill the strategic plan for the business, or undertake a big project, or work on something inside themselves. But here's the thing, they are not different people. A manager is someone who has leadership ability. A leader is someone who has to have management ability. They are the same. They're not different. And a supervisor is just another word for manager. We have all this confusion. And then, of course, we create confusion with what I call title soup, right? We just give people titles about manager, director, vice president, officer, without really thinking about, well, what do those things mean? And we get people confused about their roles. And the number one job of a manager or leader, you call them either one, is to provide some degree of certainty, for the people around them. We're going in this direction. This is what's expected. This is how we should work with each other. This is how we know we'll be rewarded and recognized. And you can't do that if you don't know what a manager is. And so we've developed those standards, not just the standard definitions, but also a standard model of what is a manager. So here's another story. You'll appreciate this.
Bring it on. I leave for storytelling.
People sometimes ask me to talk about management, or teach it, which I do, and I love to do. So I was working with a business school in America, one of the top 100, modest size, but well-established business school, and working with the director, who's a brilliant guy, a great educator. And so I said to him, Mike, we're working on some programs. I said, Mike, could you please send to me the standard model of what a leader or manager needs to know? Could you just please, email that to me? Because, there are 877 accredited business schools in the world. There should be a standard definition of what a manager is and what do they need to know. Please break that down for me. And Mike just laughed at me. He said, no, there is no standard definition of a manager, which I just gave, but also what do they need to know? And so he and I sat down in a coffee shop in Milwaukee, which is a big city in the middle of America, sort of a working class kind of town, and sort of set out to create this standard model. And my rule is everything's got to go on one page because nobody reads page 2 anymore. So we created what's called the Milwaukee
TikTok
model.
generation.
Yeah, right. And so that's another standard, right? The standard of manager development, Milwaukee model. All this is free on our website, by the way. But because that's been missing, and so because there haven't been any standards, a standard of ethics, which is all about power. You mentioned that. A standard set of terminology, which is the index. Then a standard of what does a manager need to know. Then, of course, nobody respects what a manager does, right? And so we get, in the UK, as in America, we have TV shows like The Office. Many people have seen it, right? Just making fun of managers. We have cartoons about managers. But what I want to do is, like other professions, caring professions, nurse, teacher, doctor, counselor, I want people to understand the role of manager and the good that it can do in the world, and therefore respect it. And I want more people, particularly in the new generations, as we go into an increasingly complicated world. The value of being a good manager, someone who can help people work together and inspire them. Well, the value of those abilities is going to be so high 5 years from now or sooner. So I feel like this is my calling, is to help people understand what a manager is, the good that they can do, and not only the good they can do for the people in their organizations, but the good that they can do in the world. You asked me that question, so I got going on my speech, but that's my passion and why I think being a manager is a role I really want more and more people to look at seriously and think about in a constructive way. And we're trying to contribute to that.
I think These are actually a very excellent submission. But I'm going to quickly touch on something you spoke about people disrespecting the roles, of managers, and it actually aligns with, one of my philosophies. I always say that when the use of something is unknown, abuse is inevitable. And of course, that's just what is playing out. It's always essential to give people orientation about what the use of something or, a person or a tool or role is for. And, you talk about management. That is helping people work together. But, having been through business school, having been through, first degree economics, becoming a chartered accountant, I've had the privilege to like study a lot of management texts, and I see that in theory you have a lot of management styles, spur the managerial theories. So we have certain managers that are task oriented, we have managers that are people oriented, we have managers that are goal oriented. So what would you say, with your wealth of experience thus far in, the world of management and leadership, what would you say is the ultimate management style in terms of effectiveness and efficiency?
Yeah, you framed that question really well. The most practical, most valuable thing that a manager can do in a practical sense is to delegate well, right? To be able to delegate with confidence. And of course, manager may be someone in the middle. You want your boss to delegate to you as well, right? So you'd asked me about style, and again, I love the way you framed the question. And I was saying that
Sorry.
the most important thing, valuable thing for the organization that a manager can do, is to delegate well. And to do that, of course, you have to be both. You have to be a humanist. You have to be a servant. You have to care about your people. You also have to be competent, right? You have to know what you're doing. You have to know how to create a budget. You have to know how to plan projects. You have to understand the industry. But you have to be able to delegate well, because it's leverage. That's how you leverage the talent in an organization. Because if you're goal oriented for yourself, or task oriented for yourself, or reward oriented for yourself as a manager, the organization is not going to grow. You might be successful for a while, but what's valuable to the organization is that what you're thinking about all the time is, how do I delegate this goal? How do I delegate this big project? That's the style, I think everybody should adopt. Of course, some people are extroverted, some people are introverted. Some people, of course, do have practical work that they have to get done, of course. And there's nothing wrong with also being directed to the goals and making sure tasks get done well. But the bigger picture, the bigger view for a good manager is, how do I delegate this goal? I'd just like to pick up on just a point about that. So a new manager who's delegating for the first time and is not confident in themselves or their team, they might delegate a task, and then they hover over that task. They're the classic micromanager that everybody complains about, and they're wasting everybody's time, right? Ideally, a good manager just delegates a goal, right? I'd say, okay, Arlene, I want you to take over. Our goal for our department or this unit is to increase market share or improve gross margin. You figure it out. You get your team to do it. Call me when you need me. And because I'm confident that as manager, I'm confident that you know how to do that. You've got the right team in place, but I've developed you so you can really take charge of meeting the goal. And how satisfying is that for, the employee who's put in charge of the goal, right? That makes their work really meaningful. So if there's a style, a key purpose, a practical style, this style of a manager, it's someone who's a great delegator. That's the person who's going to help everybody and the organization. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Definitely, it actually answers my question. And picking on your philosophies, you actually talk about managers making people feel safe and feel proud. So why are these two emotions so important in the workplace?
Well, those are really fundamental points. And I'm sure your listeners will all have heard about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so I have
Abraham Maslow.
Maslow, this very abbreviated, simple version, the people first have to feel safe and then appreciated and then proud is the pinnacle. And sort of talking about the delegation kind of gets at that. But if people don't feel safe, like on the bottom of the pyramid, they're never going to accomplish great things for themselves or for you. They have to feel safe. And that means they have to feel, of course, physically safe. If they're in heavy industry or construction, that's what matters. They have to be psychologically safe. And that means free from harassment, discrimination, and bullying. And they have to be financially safe. So that means that the organization has to be healthy. Because if people know, the recession or problems, they're not making their numbers, so that they can't control, they're not going to engage in the work that's going to move the organization along. So first they have to feel safe. And to do that personally, that takes rapport, that takes a good manager, a humanist who can really listen and invest the time, getting to know people. So on that point, there's a story to tell. I'm working with this manufacturer, and a fellow was just promoted basically to be COO. And he has to travel all over the world, go to a lot of different facilities. But the piece of advice he got from the CEO was to make sure he had enough time just to chat with people. Like he should spend half his time just chatting, right? Not, digging into the reports or optimizing this or, disciplining that. Just take half his time just to chat and get to know people, because that's how they're going to feel safe, when they have a human connection, certainly with a very senior manager. So those people are going to feel safe. And a lot of good things come from that. And then after that is appreciated. So again, you have to know your people well enough to say, gosh, you did a great job on this thing. I saw what you did. I'm acknowledging it. I really appreciate your contribution. And it also means, as a manager, I've given you work that is in fact meaningful to the company, because most businesses don't have a plan. We did a national study 10 years ago asking the question, national in the US, how many businesses have a written plan they follow? A lot of people have a binder, but not the plan. They don't follow the plan. The answer was 9.1%, which means
That's low.
Right, that's very bad. So I think, now just a funny story just quickly on that point about having a plan or not having a plan. I was in a CEO's office, and we were getting to know each other, and I asked him, well, do you have a plan for the business? And he just points at a binder on his bookshelf. On the spine of that binder, it said strategic plan. And I'm looking at it, and I said, well, hey, that's great. But what are the highlights of the plan? I just want to know. And because like you, I'm just always asking questions. I'm nosy, right? And he laughed. He said, Derrick, there's nothing in that binder. It's empty. He said, you're the first person to ask me what the plan was. People come in, do you have a plan? I just point to the binder. Everybody go, okay, you have a plan. They were happy. So a good manager knows how to plan and takes that seriously. And of course, we teach people how to do that. But if you don't have a plan, you don't know that your contribution, the employee doesn't know. Yeah, that's a true story.
Not having a plan is a plan on its own,
Yeah, well, it is.
If you fail to plan, you plan to fail.
That's right. Absolutely. Well, that's a whole other episode about planning. But my point about appreciation is that a manager has to give people meaningful work. It has to be meaningful both to the company. In other words, it has to fit the plan, the bigger purpose, the mission, the vision, the big goals. And it has to be appropriate to the person, right? This is something that you yourself are good at, you like to do. Your contribution is meaningful. Because if you just appreciate somebody by giving them a gift because they showed up every day, they're not going to feel that. But to say, no, your contribution, you really made a big difference here. And I can show you how it fits the big picture. Then finally, people can be really proud of what they accomplish individually and together. And that's how I think the manager's relationship with each of their people as individuals and as a team make them feel safe, show that their work matters and that you appreciate their contribution. Now, of course, sometimes that means you discover you've got somebody in the wrong role and you have to move them around. That happens. And then you have to give them, to help them achieve those big goals, to meet the big risk, the challenge that you set for them. So a manager, I think, should always be thinking about how am I delegating work, helping my team feel safe, appreciated, proud, and then Once they've achieved that, well, then you move the next goal. Like my boss did, like the good boss I'm sure that you had. Great, you accomplished this terrific thing. Here's the next challenge. I'm going to move you along further and further and further. So, but unless people don't feel safe, you can't manage them, and they won't be managed. And I don't blame them.
Excellent. And I think that's probably the most excellent referral, or connection of management with the Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs I've ever, heard about or seen. It's interesting, these things are models, but it's always lovely to apply these models in everyday life and of course business as well. But interestingly, you actually founded the Center for Management Terms and Practices, and you're connecting the practice with the theory because the theory is the basis upon which practice is actually performed. So why is that shared language so crucial in the business world?
Well, when people ask me that, I ask them to say, imagine, because like you, I'm always talking to business people or managers, right? And I'll say, well, picture you've got 6 people who are experts in marketing, together at sitting at a round table, and that you ask them, tell me exactly what is marketing? Define it for me clearly, would you please? How many of those 6 would be remotely close to each other and saying what marketing is, right? We're in meeting after meeting, and this is part of the evolution of my own practice as from a management consultant, educator to philosopher, was I realized that there was not a common understanding of these fundamental terms, like what is a manager, but also in the best practices, in the disciplines of management. And so we just got.
I guess we're talking about the terms and practices, right? And of course, the shared language, and of course, how they are very, very important.
So it's amazing, and meeting after meeting, people will go through the meeting, not really understand. Either there'll be a term, and maybe even a basic term that they don't understand, but they won't ask to get clear, or they'll be sure they understand what it means, but they have a very different understanding of the person next to them. And it sounds so simple, but one of the most important things a manager can do in a meeting is just simply ask, does everybody agree what these words mean? And I once was facilitating a discussion with a group of executives. And all I did, I just sort of set this out as an experiment. All I did was say, what does this word mean? Do we agree what this is? How do you define this term? That's all I did throughout for like an hour and a half. And the conversation was so much better just because people didn't share a fundamental understanding of what these concepts are. And on our tool, the index, again, free on our website, they're also in a tree diagram and a structure so that people can click on, marketing and sales. And then that opens up six more subtopics, market research, your marketing channels, or things like that. Click on one of those, it opens up several subtopics. And then again, and for each one of those, definition, synonyms, 3 discussion questions. And I've already complimented you on the great questions that you asked, but I think you'll appreciate them when you see them. And approved resources, so best practices. So not only at a glance, it just fits on one screen. So not only can people see what this term means, but they also can see its context. How does it relate to the rest of management? What are its components? And then get people to agree, talking about the same thing. In a way, it's as fundamental as that. But an analogy I like to make is musical notation. I know you're a martial artist and a philosopher. I don't know if you're a musician too. I don't read music.
I'm a musician too. Yeah, I am a musician as well. I love music. Music is food to the soul. And when I was way younger, I was part of the choir in church. So there you go.
So it was actually little, geeky history here. So it was about the year 1000. There was a monk in Italy, and he wanted to harmonize, figuratively, literally, sacred music, choir music. And he realized there was no standard language for music. And so he created, the musical notation that you use today. And I mean, think of how powerful that is. You can take a score and give it to people who don't speak the same language, right? They could be from Nigeria, the U.S., they could be wherever on the planet, and they can read that same common language, and then they can not only perform together, but they can create together. And that's really what the index is meant to be for management, sort of a common musical score, if you will, so that people can quickly understand how they relate, how they fit in, with their part that they play, and who's missing too, right? Well, that was the evolution of the index and thinking about the importance of common language, because management, every other field of human knowledge has that kind of common language, right? In science, there's the periodic table. In medicine, there's the taxonomy of diseases, right? And on and on. But in management, we make money off of manipulating the language, right? And so that's really expensive because people don't know how to talk to each other. And now, of course, with the internet and things being online, you just push a button and you can translate the index into any language. And we actually, our little training video, thanks to a client who wanted to do this, now has got captions in perfect French, Italian, and German. So we haven't got all the languages, but we're starting, to be able to do that. How great it would be for, multinational business. And we're all multinational businesses. I mean, here we are, right? I'm in the US, you're in the UK. We've got a multinational business going, be able to speak the same.
Wow. While growing up in Nigeria, I always said something that I am, operating local, but I think global. I do not want to ever be a local champion. I always want to be a global champion. And of course, from your mouth to God's ears. And of course, in terms of what is happening now, it feels surreal to have, somebody, of your accomplishment now confirm that, yeah, you are a global establishment. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
That means a lot to me. Like speaking of the management, like I a professional accountant, a chartered accountant, ACA, but you guys call them CPAs. And one thing we always work with, is frameworks. And of course, your index is, kind of similar, to the frameworks that we use in accounting. The most popular one is the IFRS, that's International Financial Reporting Standards. But in the US, you guys like to twist things around. You guys use the US GAAPs, which is the US generally accepted accounting principles, right? So I fundamentally understand the importance of having a framework that is generally accepted and acknowledged, by professionals in that field. And it's interesting to see how you have now been able to sort of simplify the language, the management jargon, right?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the technique of management into something that is like one of the fundamental professions, like accounting, like medicine, like law, right? It's really, really interesting to see that, the myth surrounding management, all these years has always been that, management is, a lot of myths, some people think management is something that cannot be learned, something that is innate, it's more of a nature than nurture. But with persons like yourself, we can see that you can actually learn management. You can understand it. You can build yourself to become, a better manager, a better leader, right? It's a mix of nature and nurture, right? So if you do nurture yourself, if you put in that work to understand it and understand the frameworks, understand the requirements, the technical competence, you can actually become a better leader. And it's great to actually acknowledge that body of work of yours, and also a privilege to be able to deep dive into that brilliant mind, because what you have done is something of great impact, and not just something of great impact, something that would impact lives across the globe and even beyond your own existence as a human being in this world. And I always love to speak with people who are able to establish a body of work that would outlive them. So we read the Aristotles, the Socrates, the Platos, that existed, on multiple generations before us, and we are still able to get resourceful, information by way of their body of work. So now coming to that, managerial power, right? What is the pledge of managerial power, and why should every manager take it seriously?
First, I want to say, I mean, you drew the line perfectly, I think, from the value of having a framework, to through management and the value there, and how important it is and helpful it is to learn that early on, and then also and the comparison, to the other fields of human knowledge that do have those frameworks and how respected they are. And we talked about that before, but that's really the dots that I want to connect. So thank you for highlighting that. That's tremendously important to me personally.
You're always welcome.
But you asked about the pledge of managerial power, which is the ethics standard. So I talked about the index as the standard of knowledge base terminology, the Milwaukee model, which is the standard of competence. But the pledge of managerial power is the standard of ethics. And it's really very simple. It's on a page, again, one page. But it's back to the idea, the core idea, of course, is how does a manager use their power? But do they use their power, or do they neglect their power, right? Or do they do it to serve others? I don't used to ask people, tell me about the worst boss you had. And then it was too upsetting. So we all know what we all know what that looks like. But the fundamental principle behind the pledge is that you'll use your power to care for people. And there's a philosopher in the people that you mentioned, Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, they define their words very, very carefully. So there are four words that I think people need to reflect on. And these are English definitions. So this would be a fascinating cultural conversation. But there are four words that people always describe, good people, good managers. They're sympathetic, empathetic, compassionate, and caring. And I was curious about how do those words relate? And using AI, which is really good in language, it made a really interesting distinction.
Language models. Large language models. LLMs.
At understanding common usage of language. Sympathy is when you understand someone else's suffering or need. I understand it. Empathy is you feel their suffering. You have an emotional connection. Compassion is when you want to help them. And the great leaders that you talked about, religious and global leaders, had that certainly. But caring is when you take action to help people. Both my wife and daughter are nurses. I couldn't be more proud of them, and they are in the caring profession. All they do all day is think about how am I going to care for this person. And a good manager we've talked about this already, care for people. And that's what you use your power for. So the pledge reminds people of that. But then again, it's on our about page, very easy to find, free for everybody. It has four basic questions. And the first is awareness. Are you aware of the power that you have? So that early job in the file room I was talking about, I've been working there a year or so. This is before I met my new boss, my better boss. One day the human resource director shows up. She's got a tall, skinny kid next to her. So, Derrick, here's your new assistant. First I'd heard of it. And she walks off. So I had no idea what to do. And I like to think I'm a nice person, but we all think we're nice people ourselves. But I
don't think I'm a nice person. If you know me, I always tell people, and you might have heard it on the podcast, I do not think I'm a nice person. I don't try to be a nice person. I am a kind person.
Kind person.
Yeah, because kindness is more important to me. Kindness, involves those, fundamental principles that you have spoken about. It involves caring, empathy, sympathy. That is what I really, really, for, because I am the most authentic, the most genuine person walking the face of this planet. And of course, I'm an endangered species. When have those things genuinely, it leads you to take action.
Yeah.
But I feel like being nice is about trying to fake it.
Yeah. Well, I take your point. I mean, that word of active kindness, caring, right? That's what really matters. And so the pledge talks about, first you need to be aware of it. You need to introspect and look at yourself like you've done. You need to use your power appropriately. In other words, to match the person across the table from you, right? You have to think about them as individuals. And, you have to work at it. You have to set a daily intention. Managers should come into the office. First thing, how am I going to help the people around me? And how am I going to do that with sympathy, empathy, compassion, and caring? The story I could tell, this is a lesson on me. I was working with a good-sized company, and I won't identify them, but a manager, a pretty senior person, had come from another company, and apparently the culture there was very aggressive, apparently, and not kind to people. And that was what he thought was normal. So he brought that behavior to his new job in the new company, and it was not working at all. But I had several conversations with this person. We talked about the pledge. We talked about what it means to be a manager, how he was interacting with people. And some time went by and he wasn't changing. And I was ready I offered my opinion. I shouldn't do that, but I did, which is to say, I don't think this guy's going to be a fit here. I think he should go somewhere else. But the head of human resources said, no, I believe in this guy. We're just going to keep talking to him about how he uses his power, how he treats people. We're going to teach him how to be thoughtful, how to introspect, how to think of his people as individuals. And then, so some months go by. I'm leading a session, facilitating a conversation about strategic planning. This guy shows up. In the past, I was all nervous about him in the room because he was going to be a flamethrower, 180-degree turn. He had looked inside himself. He thought about the power that he had, the opportunity that he had to help others. He came into that meeting like a different person. He asked people about their opinion. He listened. He talked about his own mistakes, his own confusion. He gave other people credit for things. It was transformative. And so that was a lesson to me that it takes patience. I didn't have enough, but the human resources.
Patience is a virtue.
Yeah, it's a virtue. And that's another part about, you talked about style of management and kind of person that requires. Genuine kindness in the face of someone who's upset or confused or mistaken. It takes time. It takes time. And, well, you can have some faith too that, like you do, if you treat people with kindness, eventually, right, that will come back to you in some form.
Exactly. My core principles are just three, the fundamental principles when it comes to myself, my philosophy. They're kindness, respect, and hospitality. When you're kind to people, you respect them, and you're truly hospitable. Hospitality is, part of being compassionate, being empathetic, being sympathetic, and truly caring about people. Right, it will come back to you, and of course, people would easily warm up to you, and it has always worked for me. And I love that I am that kind of person. I love myself for it.
Good.
But
well, let me ask you: do you think those values come from your upbringing in Nigeria? Is there a certain Nigerian tone to that, or is it from other life experiences?
Yes, I think I'm very, very strongly, connected to my Nigerian, would I say, upbringing, identity, culture, and also my background with my parents. So those were the themes, the principles that my parents held in high esteem. In Nigeria, there's something they call home training. It actually aligns with the sociological theories of would I say, the social institutions. The most important institution in society is the family. So you have the family, you have the media, you have religious institutions, you have educational institutions, but the primary social institution is the family. And I think the reason why we have a lot of broken and dysfunctional individuals in society today is because they got it wrong at the level of the family setting, which is a primary sociological institution. So for me, my parents placed a lot of emphasis on a lot of good values, right? Hard work, self-belief, being ambitious, believing in yourself, so many things. But I think the only thing is they did not have a structure to all these things, they were trying to teach us. But me being a person of structure, you go, it's more like, you have this traditional orators, they know the history of the village and they can tell you about the kings that existed, in the past 10 generations or 12 generations, but the tradition is not written down. But me growing up and experiencing life and discovering myself, I started to structure these philosophies into condensed forms. And for me, I discovered the ABC of communication is be accurate, be brief, and be concise. So it made me to start, forming these principles into very, very powerful bullet points. Yes, so I would say the culture is a part of it, but I would say it's fundamentally about that home training. Yeah, it's a function of the home training and my personality, and of course, it's such a great way to segue to what I was going to ask you next. I oftentimes in my philosophical reminiscing think about the nature versus nurture argument. I remember when I was a teenager, my mom discovered that I was actually a very good teacher. And my mom was like, "Oh, it's like this teaching thing is your calling." The whole religious thing, like, excuse me, ma, I saw that, teachers don't make much money. I said, excuse me, ma, that's a missed call. Yeah, I don't think I want to pick up the score, but I discovered I was always very good with communication, explaining complex concepts to people and they understand it. But
That sounds like being a teacher.
yeah, well, teachers don't make much money off it, but growing up, being in global institutions, I discovered, oh, you could actually package this whole teaching thing in such a way that it becomes scalable. And if you actually develop yourself, you can make a lot of money being a well-packaged teacher. Now I've become like a celebrity teacher, because I did teach, at different levels. I taught professional students, for professional accounting courses, and even now myself and a couple of business partners are working on, certain courses that will be rolling out soon. So I let the cat out of the bag in a bit, but back to the nature versus nurture thing. Do you think management is a calling? Do you think management is a function of nature? Or you think it is a function of nurture?
Well, I think I think that it's a function of nature that can be nurtured. A lot of people ask, right? Are people are good managers or leaders? Are they born? Can you teach it? And I think fundamentally people are born with that drive to serve. Some people are driven in other ways that are perfectly valuable. They want to be an excellent craftsperson or a professional and a specialist. Those are great things to do. But the role of the manager, I mean, as you've seen it, once you have a framework and you understand the value and how you deliver value by helping people reach their full potential, that I think is mostly a matter of nature. I do hear stories when I ask people about, why did you become a manager? And, I ask their origin story. Sometimes they tell me stories from when they were children. They were in school and they had a teacher, or they just naturally took charge of things. I was that way a little bit. But I think so that those sometimes just see the naturals that emerge and they run organizations and they have a natural ability. and they refine that. They improve. They have things to learn, but they just sort of get naturally. It's in their nature to help people work together and how to communicate and how to connect. I'm working with a woman now who's the head of training in an organization. Just has amazing ability to connect people and lead them along in a way that seems like they're the ones doing all the leading. But having said that, because there has been no framework for management, what I've found that if you give people the framework, I've seen this, like the story I told about this guy who was having problems. You give them a framework of what they need to know, what they're expected to learn, how they're expected to behave. That's the pledge of managerial power and the ethical standard. Now they have something that they can build on, and that might wake up in them, a real ability to be a good manager and leader. It's a lifetime study. No one is a prodigy all at once or just figures it out all in a year. But you can wake that up, like in other fields. But it's usually the moment of transformation is when, and so again, sometimes this happens when someone's just a child in school, or maybe they're on a sports team, but maybe someone's put in a manager role. But once they see how they can make other people happy, safe, appreciated, proud, once they see that they can do that and feel that, that's when the commitment builds. And then that's when they set themselves on the path. And then they look to be nurtured, and they reach out for that help. And I remember working with an NGO, and there was a woman who was in charge.
Another thing we have in common, I did work with an NGO before, Peter.
Oh, well, it's a different sort of vibe, right? And this woman had been sort of in a technical role in human resources. And she was having problems fitting in, but the executive director just had this insight, maybe she's really better as a manager. So made her a manager in information systems. And she just flourished. It just brought out a whole new person, the real person. And she did so well. So I think you're born with it, really, the inclination. You can train it, you can wake it up. And sometimes, though, and I think this is really important, because a lot of people are asked to be a manager or made to be a manager, and they shouldn't be. So, to me, it's a success, and this has happened a few times, as we take people through the Milwaukee model, these standards. They say, you know what? I'm a manager. I don't really want to be a manager. I don't want to have the power. I'm really more interested in the technical issues. I don't want to be a manager anymore now that I really understand it. And that's great. That's great for them. That's great for the people who are working for them. It's great for the organization. So that's a really important question that people have to ask. And certainly maybe before they sign up for, an MBA in management, do you really want to make this commitment and have a way to think about that, have a framework, which to evaluate, that decision as a student. So there's a lot of people become managers for the wrong reasons. And therefore they're bad managers and they're unhappy. So it's important to get that.
That's actually true. That's very, very true, because, for a lot of people, that's just the next step in terms of the career ladder. But you want the higher pay, you want the higher role, but do you really think you're ready for the higher responsibility? It's a question for everybody to internalize, and this standard regarding that. We have different people from different parts of the world, and of course, interestingly, you've actually worked with different organizations around the world. Love for you to quickly touch on cultural differences. So how does cultural differences affect how people perceive good or bad management?
Yeah, it's to me, that's the most fascinating question. And I love to travel. My wife loves to travel. So we like to meet people and talk about their experiences. So my observation is the biggest difference among managers, culture to culture, is how they make decisions, right? And some of this is pretty well reported. Some cultures, very hierarchical. And maybe there was at one point a caste system, social strata. And so they make decisions in an organization that way. And so you get managers who think that way. Others, more collaborative, right? You have to get everybody involved. It takes a longer time. You build a lot of consensus around decision-making. That, of course, then affects how you delegate, how you run projects, how you communicate. And so those are stylistic differences, not better or worse, but more suited to those different cultures. So that's to me is sort of the most fundamental, one of the most fundamental differences. And the other is just generally a cultural difference about ambition and materialism. Are people want to just make money, or they want to build equity for their family? That's, or do they want to grow an organization? And that's different from, culture to culture too. Are they more materialistic, more oriented to society? As you've described it, I've never been to Nigeria. I hope to go, but it sounds like culturally different than the United States. Of course, the United States.
Absolutely, you will enjoy it there. Trust me.
Good. And so those are the ambition, and then how they make decisions. So far, the primary differences that I see. However, what's also interesting is that management is a universal science, right? It's the study of how people work together, and it's fundamental to human nature. So there are differences, and those are important. And there are lots of other sort of styles, etiquette differences, and those kinds of things. But the degree of similarity among organizations from Africa, Asia, Europe, South America, North America, so a lot of the pragmatic issues, they're universal. Small organization, global organization, non-for-profit, NGO, government agency, small professional service firm. They all have to face the same similar, management decision-making. So one of my big aspiration, sort of one picture of success is you and I are hosting the international conference for the Center of Management Terms and Practices. And
fantastic.
In Lagos or Paris or someplace we all want to go. And we got people from all over the world sharing, their ideas about how do we manage differently? What's the same? What's different? How do you use these words? What are you trying to achieve? Tell me your success stories. And people are making contacts and doing business too. So that's my picture of success. It's sort of this United Nations of people talking the same language and being able to work together, and helping each other have great workplaces where people just are excited to come to work every day. So that's my big picture. You could be the keynote speaker.
Definitely, absolutely, and of course, again, from your mouth to God's ears, so it will happen. I appreciate that invite. What I'm not excited about is the fact that it's hard to say goodbye, and we do have another guest waiting in the lobby, and not a problem. We will take this up from part 2. But before I let you go, I'm going to run you through the quick fire round of our questions. Are you ready to rumble?
I'm ready.
Okay, so just say the first thing that comes to your mind. So I have 5 questions for you, quick. Number 1, what's the worst piece of leadership advice you've ever heard?
The worst piece is anybody can be a leader.
Okay, number 2, MBA or on-the-job experience, if you had to choose one.
Well, I'd start with on-the-job experience, and then
okay,
but absolutely start with on-the-job experience.
Yeah, I'm always very happy I did have, my on-the-job experience before I did my MBA. It actually helps you to make the best use of your MBA and understand, the concepts and the context that they actually teach you in the MBA program. A shout out to my MBA guys at Augment Business School. I've had some of the founders on this podcast as well. It's a great and fantastic program. Number 3, your favorite management book that you did not write.
All right. It's called Street Smarts by Norm Brodsky, Brodsky. Street Smarts. Norm was a serial author for Inc. magazine. It's a well-established small business management magazine in the U.S. Terrific. And he just works people through by telling stories, practical advice, the basic things to do. One of his pieces of advice I love to share with certainly first-time entrepreneurs, start off by doing your books by hand. So you really know pencil and paper, so you really know it goes into gross margin and what net margin is all about. That and lots of other incredibly practical, no nonsense pieces of advice. I think it's a great book, well written, well structured, lots of stories, readable.
Interesting. So number 4, what's one meeting scene that drives you absolutely crazy?
Well, it's starting without a purpose. Let's just.
Whoa! When the purpose of something is unknown, abuse is inevitable. I like that.
Your last question is, I think, the best one, because it's the mirror. If you want to know if someone's a good manager, just sit in one of their meetings. Because a good manager starts, here's exactly what we're laying out to do. Here's what I'm going to delegate to you guys. Here are the 3 great questions I have for you guys, like you've asked me, to stimulate your thinking. And do we agree on the terms? Do we understand each other? Do we have the right people in the room? And who's going to take responsibility for results? And then as the manager or leader of the meeting, call me if you need me. I'll help you however I can. But it starts with clarity of purpose. Clarity is essential to everything. It's clarity how people feel. Do they feel safe? Do they know what they're doing? Do they know where they're headed? That's the most important thing. So what is this discussion about? Whether it's the strategic plan or a meeting, that's the meeting scene. You have to write down 20 words or less. This is what we're here to do. So.
And again, this links back to my philosophy on communication: the ABC: be accurate, be brief, and be concise. So the last one, number 5, fill in the blank. A great boss is someone who
Can put other people before themselves.
Interesting. Yeah. Back to the philosophy of being a servant leader.
That's right. And they have faith. They know that that's good for everybody. Right. That doesn't mean that they're just nice, they're a pushover or easy, but they're always thinking, how can I support this person? And give them the credit, let them enjoy the success, give them something to be proud of.
Very, very well said. Important. And of course, that's actually very valuable. It keeps people going, it keeps people motivated, and that's just a sustainable way, to lead and of course to do business. And from me to you, it's all love and respect to you. I always say something: an attitude of gratitude is a good attitude. And when somebody shares their time with you, they share their life with you, because the SI unit for measuring life is time. So a very, very big thank you to you today for sharing your life, your time with myself and the audience today. And before you go, I don't know if you want to give a shout out to anyone, but please do encourage our audience to do the needful: like, share, subscribe, share this fantastic work out, because I'm working tirelessly to bring in fantastic, tremendous, highly resourceful, highly inspiring, highly educating, individuals like Derrick. I am building the brick to bring in Derrick. So please do your own part of the work. So do you want to leave a shout out to anyone before you leave?
No, well, thank you for having me here, and I've loved listening to your episode.
Thank you too.
And I know I met Arlene, who's coming up next, and I'm sure that's going to be great too.
Well, and of course, shout out to our episode. I think this is episode 99. Guys, you're in for a role. You're in for great, great stuff. Yeah. Till I come your way again, you guys do have a wonderful time, and of course, look out to yourselves and go into the show notes. I think I would have your resources in the show notes: your website, your LinkedIn, and of course links to your books and the index as well in the show note. Okay, do have a great time, guys.